A photograph surfaced showing two men standing together, framed by gentle afternoon light, appearing calm and almost brotherly. Yet something in the older man's grip on the younger's shoulder felt strangely out of place, demanding closer attention. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, just two companions frozen in time, their expressions steady and composed. But the longer you study the image, the more the younger man's posture reveals a story he never meant to tell. His eyes carry a tension that contradicts the calm setting surrounding them, a silent plea hidden beneath practiced stillness. Meanwhile, the older man's hand tightens with a pressure impossible to ignore once noticed, shifting everything you thought you understood. That single touch, subtle yet deliberate, transforms the photograph from a simple portrait into a window towards something darker, an unspoken dynamic rooted in power, fear, and a truth waiting patiently beneath the surface to finally be recognized. If you're drawn to untold histories, hidden tensions, and the stories that photographs whisper when examined closely, consider subscribing. It helps bring more documentaries like this to life and ensures these overlooked narratives finally get the attention they deserve. The photograph first appeared harmless, showing two men standing shoulder to shoulder beneath soft lantern light, drifting across an aging workshop. Yet the older man's tightening grip on the younger's shoulder hinted at something quietly resisting the peaceful scene. From afar, nothing disrupted the illusion of calm. Two companions, framed neatly, captured within a moment that seemed to belong to another lifetime. But the younger man's stiffened posture carried a tension suggesting he wished to be anywhere else. His eyes avoided the camera entirely, narrowing slightly, as if listening for footsteps approaching behind him. That subtle shift in gaze created an immediate sense of unease, like he sensed the world pressing closer than either viewer anticipated. The older man's expression remained practiced, confident, almost rehearsed. Yet the weight of his hand told another story altogether. Firm, controlling, possessive, a gesture gentle enough to appear friendly, powerful enough to command obedience without uttering a word. When historians first examined the photograph, most overlooked that single detail. They focused on clothing, lighting, and composition. But those elements distracted from the emotional truth captured unintentionally deeper within the younger man's rigid stance. A closer inspection revealed tension along his neck, barely noticeable at first glance, yet unmistakable once acknowledged. Muscles drawn tight beneath the surface, signaling not comfort but constraint, as though he braced himself against something no one else could see. The wide-angled setting only intensified the discomfort. Tools hung neatly along the far wall, untouched for years. Dust floated through golden light, pooling atop an old wooden workbench, framing the two men like fragile specters suspended between stories. Archivists initially classified the image as a simple commemorative portrait celebrating old friendship. Yet something about it resisted that assumption. Every time someone revisited the photograph, the younger man's silent tension demanded a louder question. Why did he stand so still? Why did he lean away ever so slightly from the older man's grip, despite pretending otherwise? Those micro-movements revealed a truth rarely recorded openly, yet etched unmistakably inside the frame. The first researcher to notice the discrepancy was a quiet historian named Rowan, whose instinct for hidden tension bordered on uncanny. He had spent years studying overlooked images, decoding unspoken dynamics concealed behind forced composure. When he zoomed carefully into the photograph, he froze. The older man's fingers dug faintly into the younger man's jacket, creating subtle indentations across the fabric. That pressure did not suggest camaraderie. It signaled restraint. Rowan's breath slowed as he realized the photograph was not documenting friendship. It was capturing power disguised as closeness. And once he recognized that truth, he saw the unsettling clues scattered throughout the entire composition. The younger man's hands remained tightly clasped together near his waist, knuckles paled with strain. His stance attempted neutrality, yet his body betrayed growing discomfort, a quiet readiness to recoil the moment permission allowed. Rowan located archival notes indicating the older man, identified as Halden, oversaw a group of laborers on a remote property. The younger man, named Corin, had recently joined under unclear circumstances, rumors lingering like unresolved echoes. The more Rowan read, the less the portrait resembled a celebration and the more it resembled documentation. A record of ownership masked as kinship, taken deliberately, preserved carefully, and mislabeled intentionally for decades. Something inside Rowan tightened. He understood photographs were never merely photographs. They were choices, decisions, frames shaped by whoever held the power to define the moment, leaving everyone else trapped inside interpretations they never agreed to. He returned to the print the next morning, studying it again under cooler light. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. The younger man's posture now seemed louder than the entire surrounding workshop combined. A faint shadow along Corin's jaw suggested bruising, barely visible unless illuminated correctly. Rowan traced the discoloration with his eyes, feeling a chill move slowly across his spine. The portrait was beginning to reveal far more than intended. The background offered additional clues. A narrow iron hook hung behind the men, positioned strangely close to Halden's reach. The angle suggested it had been used often, though its exact purpose remained undocumented and unsettlingly ambiguous. Rowan widened the digital view further and noticed something else. Corin's boots were turned slightly outward, a stance common among men prepared to flee but forced to remain still. Fight or flight frozen mid-decision, recorded permanently. By evening, Rowan realized he could no longer treat the photograph as a passive artifact. It demanded investigation. It demanded context. It demanded acknowledgement of the silent tension preserved inside every carefully controlled detail. Records from the property hinted at frequent disputes between Halden and newly hired workers. Many descriptions depicted the older man as authoritative, disciplined, unwavering. Yet those same records described Corin as thoughtful, independent, and unwilling to be controlled. The clash between those profiles aligned perfectly with the photograph's hidden story. Halden gripped Corin's shoulder not out of affection, but as unspoken assertion. A reminder, a warning, a claim to authority that required no audible reinforcement. Rowan uncovered a faded ledger containing handwritten notes listing disciplinary actions. Corin's name appeared several times, associated with comments suggesting defiance, questioning protocols, or refusing certain assigned tasks without explanation. The ledger painted Corin not as rebellious, but as principled, unwilling to participate in something he had not agreed to fully understand. And that principle, Rowan suspected, had created the tension exploding quietly inside the photograph. As Rowan pieced together fragment after fragment, a clearer narrative began forming. Corin was not merely uncomfortable that day. He was trapped between obligation and autonomy, caught beneath the controlling presence of an older man determined to keep hold. That realization transformed the photograph entirely. What once appeared tranquil now felt suffocating. What once resembled companionship now resembled coercion sculpted carefully into silence, preserved through time without consent or explanation. Rowan leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy with realization. The photograph captured a dynamic few would question unless forced to look without distraction. It showed resistance disguised as composure and dominance disguised as guardianship. He wondered how many viewers had sensed something wrong but dismissed it quickly, trusting the surface narrative offered rather than what the image actually revealed. And how many similar photographs existed, hiding untold relationships behind polite poses. The thought unsettled him deeply. Images froze truth, but they also buried it. Every photograph held the power to rewrite a man's story depending on who described it. And this particular one screamed for its version to finally be reconsidered. As Rowan prepared his report, he wrote slowly, realizing the responsibility resting in every word. He was not merely analyzing composition. He was excavating unspoken humanity, retrieving a silent plea encoded in posture and pressure. He ended his notes with a single observation. Sometimes a photograph reveals its truth only when someone chooses to look beyond the surface. And once seen, that truth cannot return to silence, no matter how deeply it was buried. He closed the file, aware this discovery was only the beginning. Whatever unfolded next would reshape everything he believed about preserved images, coerced narratives, and the quiet resilience of men standing beside forces they never wished to face. The photograph remained on his desk long after sunset, its muted light drawing Rowan's gaze repeatedly. Each time he looked, he understood a little more, recognizing the moment captured as a silent confrontation rather than a peaceful memory. He whispered softly into the still room, acknowledging the younger man whose silent tension had traveled across decades. You deserve someone to notice. You deserved someone willing to see what others overlooked. Rowan returned to the archives expecting clarity, but instead found corridors heavy with dust and silence, as though the building itself wanted him to reconsider his path. Yet something deeper urged him forward, resisting every quiet warning surrounding him. He walked past shelves filled with forgotten ledgers, each book carrying stories men never meant anyone to uncover. The dim lights flickered above him, giving the impression that even the machinery feared illuminating these hidden truths. He located a stack of records labeled simply with dates, their edges warped from age. Something about their placement felt intentional, like someone once wished to hide them without outright destroying their contents or significance. When Rowan opened the first ledger, he found meticulous notes in Halden's handwriting. The entries listed names, tasks, and terse remarks. Yet Corin's name appeared more than any other, accompanied by phrases carrying unmistakable tension beneath their surface. One entry described Corin as uncooperative, another called him inquisitive, and a third warned that he showed excessive independence. Rowan recognized these words. They were not neutral observations. They were signals of conflict disguised behind administrative language. He flipped further, noticing occasional smudges across lines mentioning discipline. The pressure of the ink indicated frustration, perhaps anger. Rowan imagined Halden leaning over this very desk, writing each sentence with a tightening jaw. A second ledger revealed financial tallies, yet interwoven unexpectedly with personal notes about men under Halden's watch. Corin's presence appeared again, surrounded by vague remarks suggesting private confrontations rarely shared openly. The pattern disturbed Rowan. These entries resembled coded warnings rather than documentation. Halden was not merely recording behavior. He was reinforcing authority through written memory, shaping narratives that could outlive the men involved. Rowan uncovered a faded envelope containing correspondence between Halden and a regional overseer. One letter referenced a disagreement involving Corin, described cryptically as a matter of insubordination requiring further corrective action. The phrasing unsettled Rowan instantly. He felt something tightening within him, recognizing the tone used by men who feared losing control. Halden's voice echoed through the letter with calculated restraint layered over growing frustration, revealing more than he likely intended. The next document shocked Rowan entirely. A formal complaint filed by another worker months before Corin arrived. The complainant warned of Halden's methods, describing subtle coercion masked behind structured discipline. His words resembled quiet pleas ignored by superiors. Rowan read the complaint repeatedly, realizing the system around Halden functioned to protect him, not the men he oversaw. The report had never been investigated, instead buried beneath routine paperwork. Even its edges carried neglect. A separate journal, unsigned but familiar in tone, chronicled private observations about life under Halden's command. The writer referenced witnessing confrontations, describing guarded conversations and men shrinking under Halden's imposing presence. Each entry trembled with caution. The journal described Corin's arrival as a turning point. The writer observed how Halden watched him differently, analyzing him more intently than others, as though unsettled by the younger man's determination to remain independent. Rowan felt each sentence strike him sharply. The entries revealed a dynamic far deeper than a photograph could convey. Halden saw a challenge where he expected obedience, and that tension shaped everything recorded afterward. When Rowan compared dates between documents, a timeline emerged. Every recorded conflict aligned closely with days surrounding the photograph. The image was not a commemorative portrait. It marked a specific moment of struggle between authority and resistance. He noticed archiving tags indicating certain pages were deliberately removed decades earlier. The missing sections appeared around incidents referencing Corin directly. Rowan's pulse quickened, realizing parts of the truth were taken intentionally. He searched surrounding boxes, hoping misplaced pages might surface. Instead, he discovered sealed notes marked confidential, now opened reluctantly by time. Their contents referenced discussions about handling a man described as problematic yet skilled. The description matched Corin unmistakably. Rowan imagined the pressure building around him, multiple men debating his fate without including him, deciding how to control someone who simply wanted autonomy within a system offering none. Another letter contained Halden's direct request for external approval to enforce stricter measures. His wording appeared polite, yet beneath each sentence lurked an unmistakable urge to reassert dominance wherever challenge appeared. Rowan exhaled, slowly reading it. He realized the archives contained not one story, but an entire network of hidden narratives, each record shaped by men preserving their authority, leaving fragments for future generations to piece together painstakingly. Rowan wondered how many such stories remained buried. How many images like that photograph existed without explanation? How many men carried silent burdens hidden behind forced composure and recorded only through selective documentation? He continued reading, reaching a small note scrawled hastily, likely by someone under pressure. It mentioned Corin refusing an instruction deemed unreasonable. The writer feared repercussions, hinting that retaliation felt inevitable given Halden's growing agitation. Rowan's chest tightened again. The note's abrupt ending implied interruption. Whether by fear, force, or circumstance, the writer never finished his thought. Yet the words already revealed enough to understand the weight surrounding Corin's resistance. Examining further documents, Rowan found work logs showing shifts abruptly reassigned after certain disputes. Corin's responsibilities fluctuated unpredictably, suggesting attempts to isolate or unsettle him, using structure itself as a method of pressure. He realized Halden weaponized routine, shaping the environment to bend others without overt confrontation. That knowledge cast the photograph's tension into sharper clarity. The shoulder grip represented not protection, but claim. A final record contained Halden's personal evaluation of Corin, written weeks later. The assessment declared him valuable yet troublesome, respected by peers yet unwilling to conform fully. The contradictions revealed the core conflict gripping their relationship. Rowan closed the folder slowly, aware he now carried responsibility for truths intentionally buried. The weight of what he uncovered pressed heavily on him, echoing the silent tension etched into the original photograph. He looked around the dim archive room, feeling history leaning close, urging him to continue. These documents were not merely records. They were voices, warnings, fragments of men who endured more than the pages dared reveal openly. Rowan exhaled deeply, understanding this chapter of the story was far from complete. Something larger connected every ledger, letter, and torn page. And whatever awaited him next would challenge everything he believed about documented history. He gathered the documents carefully, knowing the next steps demanded precision. The past was speaking louder now, refusing to remain buried. And Rowan, whether ready or not, had become its unwilling translator. Rowan expected Chapter 2's discoveries to unsettle him, but nothing prepared him for the expanding pattern emerging from newly uncovered photographs. Each image, taken years apart, carried the same unsettling tension disguised carefully beneath practiced composure and stage companionship. He laid several prints side by side across a long archival table. Each depicted two men posed formally, standing close enough to suggest familiarity, yet carrying unspoken tension visible only in the smallest gestures captured unintentionally. The similarities were impossible to ignore. In every portrait, the older man's hand rested on the younger's shoulder, mimicking reassurance yet tightening subtly, forming an undeniable thread linking all images through identical postures of control. Rowan leaned closer, noticing each younger man's expression carried quiet strain. Their jaws tightened, their eyes drifted, their stance skewed slightly away from the imposed touch. The emotional truth echoed loudly despite the photograph's composed appearance. A chilling realization dawned. Halden was not alone in creating these stage portrayals of hierarchy disguised as camaraderie. Multiple men across different regions appeared to follow the same pattern, repeating the same uncomfortable dynamic. Rowan's pulse quickened as he retrieved additional notes from storage. The documents revealed various overseers' commissioned portraits under the guise of commemorating partnerships, yet records suggested tension and resistance beneath those carefully scripted narratives. He enlarged one photograph digitally, revealing a younger man named Joran who showed the same defensive posture Corin once displayed. His hands clasped tightly, shoulders raised subtly, signaling internal conflict captured despite intentional orchestration. The older man beside Joran, identified as Merrick, displayed the same confident expression Halden once wore. His grip mirrored Halden's exactly, pressing firmly into Joran's jacket. Rowan felt the familiar shock tightening inside him again. Rowan reviewed ledgers associated with Merrick's operations. The entries mirrored Halden's, describing certain workers as difficult, questioning, or defiant. The language differed slightly, but the underlying structure of authority remained disturbingly consistent across locations. He realized the pattern spanned multiple years, multiple properties, and multiple men. Different overseers, different workers, yet identical dynamics appeared repeatedly, captured through staged photographs meant to project harmony while hiding imbalance. Older researchers likely dismissed the photographs as ceremonial portraits, never analyzing the physical subtleties or contextual records. Rowan, however, felt the tension unmistakably. Once seen, the truth echoed through every frame. He studied another image featuring a young man named Davin standing beside a stern overseer. Davin's eyes revealed exhaustion rather than defiance, an internal resignation Rowan recognized instantly. The older man's grip remained unwavering. Documents tied to Davin's property described disciplinary sessions worded vaguely, yet containing hints of coercion. Rowan interpreted the notes differently now, understanding the coded language embedded within routine documentation. Rowan spread the images into a timeline, each photograph representing a moment in which an older man exerted dominance over a younger man through subtle but definitive gestures. The repetition felt too deliberate to dismiss. He considered the possibility these portraits served as symbolic demonstrations of authority rather than casual mementos. They froze hierarchical relationships intentionally, turning control into something visually permanent, socially reinforced, and historically misinterpreted. This realization unsettled Rowan deeply. He felt as if he were witnessing shadows stretching across decades, each image whispering the same quiet warning that had gone unheard for far too long. He returned to Halden's archives, now viewing them differently. Halden was not a unique anomaly. He was part of a larger culture where oversight disguised coercion and forced proximity masqueraded as brotherly unity. Records mention gatherings between overseers where they shared methods for maintaining order among workers. These notes, once dismissed as administrative concerns, now appeared to reference unspoken techniques of psychological control preserved through these photographs. Rowan found a handwritten memo describing the importance of visible guidance when managing uncooperative workers. The phrase felt coded, a subtle endorsement of asserting authority physically to shape perception among observers. He realized the photographs were not private keepsakes. They were messaging tools, symbols of dominance carefully crafted to reassure superiors while discouraging workers from challenging authority publicly. This revelation reframed Corin's experience entirely. He was not alone. His silent tension reflected countless others who endured similar pressures, their struggles captured accidentally, through expressions and posture rather than intentional storytelling. Rowan opened a final box containing damaged photos. One image stood out. A young man named Ryland stood beside an older authority figure. Unlike the others, Ryland's expression held open defiance rather than concealed strain. The older man's grip appeared stronger, almost desperate, as though he attempted to contain what could not be controlled. Ryland's slight lean away looked more pronounced than in other images, revealing refusal rather than fear. Rowan searched Ryland's records and discovered abrupt reassignment notes. The wording suggested relocation after unresolved disagreements. Rowan suspected the disagreements referenced clear resistance against imposed authority. He paused, absorbing the implications. These photographs were not anomalies. They represented a recurring dynamic where younger men struggled quietly beneath the weight of older men determined to maintain unquestioned control. The deeper Rowan explored, the more he sensed the emotional thread binding these men across time. Silent battles, forced compliance, internal tension, all hidden beneath the polished surface of staged portraiture. He wondered how many viewers ignored the discomfort once embedded inside these images, convinced they portrayed unity rather than unease. The truth required more than observation. It required willingness to confront subtle pain. Rowan understood now that history did not bury these stories accidentally. The system relied on silence, expecting no one would ever examine expressions closely enough to uncover what truly occurred. He felt compelled to continue, motivated not by academic curiosity, but by a responsibility to the men whose unspoken struggle remained preserved within every grain of each aged photograph. The room felt heavier as Rowan gathered the images. Their collective weight extended beyond paper and ink. They represented lives altered by power, narratives distorted by hierarchy, and moments of resistance captured unintentionally for future eyes. He placed Corin's photograph at the center of the table, surrounding it with the others. The patterns aligned clearly now, revealing not coincidence but structure, not anomaly but system. Rowan whispered softly to himself, acknowledging the truth history once obscured. This was never about a single photograph. It was a quiet legacy spanning generations, demanding recognition and refusing further erasure. He prepared his notes carefully, aware the next step would finally connect these hidden threads. Whatever came next would challenge long-accepted narratives and bring forward truths buried intentionally beneath the veneer of order. The deeper Rowan traveled into the archive's forgotten corners, the more he sensed the weight of every man whose silent struggle had been preserved unintentionally. The air felt thicker here, filled with truths waiting decades to be acknowledged. He carried the photographs carefully toward a dim study room, arranging them in deliberate order. Corin's image remained central, surrounded by portraits of other men who endured similar tensions masked behind crafted stillness and carefully staged hierarchy. Rowan leaned forward, absorbing the collective atmosphere pressing from the assembled images. Each younger man's expression echoed the same quiet defiance or restrained discomfort. Familiar shadows stretched across every photograph, binding them together through unspoken resilience. He realized these men, though separated by time and distance, shared a common experience. They navigated environments controlled by older figures determined to shape their identities through forced allegiance and subtle domination disguised as mentorship or companionship. Yet despite those pressures, the younger men's eyes betrayed deeper stories. Their gaze avoided the camera or stared through it, revealing not loyalty but internal battle. Rowan understood now that these expressions were their last form of resistance. He discovered a sealed report written decades after Halden's era. The author described dismantling practices once considered standard, acknowledging that previous overseers created environments prioritizing control over dignity, often under the guise of order and discipline. The report referenced unnamed men who suffered quietly, their struggles dismissed or buried to protect reputations. Rowan felt certain Corin's experience was included among those forgotten accounts, even if his name never appeared directly. He continued searching through dusty boxes until he found a slim journal with pages worn along the edges. Inside, he discovered entries written by a man who once worked alongside Corin during Halden's tenure. The writer described Corin as steadfast, thoughtful, and unwilling to accept unjust treatment. He admired Corin's resolve but feared openly supporting him, knowing Halden retaliated quickly against perceived challenges. One entry explained how Corin once confronted Halden privately, refusing an unreasonable command. The writer overheard fragments of the exchange, describing Halden's rising frustration and Corin's unwavering tone. That confrontation occurred days before the photograph was taken. Rowan felt chills reading that passage. The image now carried a deeper weight. It captured the moment Halden attempted to reassert dominance after a direct challenge. The gesture on Corin's shoulder became painfully clear. Rowan inspected subsequent pages hoping for closure. The journal mentioned Corin leaving the property unexpectedly after weeks of escalating tension. The writer never learned where he went, but since the departure was neither peaceful nor voluntary. This uncertainty haunted Rowan. Corin's fate remained absent from every document, creating an empty space that echoed louder than any written record. He felt compelled to restore Corin's agency through understanding, even if the archives offered limited fragments. He gathered additional references describing broader reforms decades later. These documents acknowledged past systems relied heavily on coercion masked as leadership. The reforms emphasized transparency, autonomy, and equitable treatment, changes built upon lessons learned from overlooked suffering. Rowan realized these transformations stemmed indirectly from countless men whose silent endurance forced future generations to rethink authority. Their unspoken resilience shaped history more profoundly than any overseer's recorded accomplishments. He revisited the photographs, noticing something new. Though each younger man appeared tense, none looked defeated. Their expressions held pain, yes, but also resolve, an unwillingness to surrender individuality despite immense pressure. This recognition reshaped Rowan's perspective completely. These images were not merely records of coercion, they were testaments of strength. Moments where men preserved fragments of autonomy, even under dominating hands pressing deliberately against their shoulders. He wondered how many other researchers misinterpreted these portraits, assuming unity where strain existed, assuming trust where resistance thrived. Without context, surface interpretation allowed oppressive narratives to persist unchallenged. But context was Rowan's calling. His work transformed each photograph from a silent artifact into a voice reclaiming its place in history. He understood now that his responsibility extended beyond analysis. It demanded truth restored faithfully. Rowan organized his findings carefully into a comprehensive report. Each section compared photographs, contextual documents, and first-hand accounts to demonstrate the recurring dynamics deliberately obscured by structured record-keeping and authority-driven storytelling. His final chapter focused on legacy. He argued these men deserved recognition not for their suffering alone, but for their resilience. Their quiet defiance influenced future reforms more significantly than any overseer's directives. When Rowan presented his findings to the institution's review board, the room fell silent. The members examined the photographs with new awareness, recognizing the patterns they previously overlooked or dismissed unknowingly. No one questioned Rowan's conclusions. The evidence spoke too clearly. The photographs revealed a deeply rooted culture of coercion that had shaped generations of men forced into silence by systems preserving appearances over truth. The board approved a public exhibition dedicated to the men whose stories were hidden behind forced smiles and tightened grips. Rowan felt a profound mixture of relief and responsibility settle across him. Months later, the exhibition opened in a restored hall once used for administrative gatherings. Visitors entered to find Corrin's photograph displayed at the center, surrounded by the others Rowan uncovered. Soft lighting emphasized every detail once overlooked: the tightened hand, the tense shoulders, the diverted gaze. Each photograph projected emotions stronger than any accompanying text could fully capture. Visitors moved slowly through the hall, studying the portraits with solemnity. Many paused before Corrin's image longer than others, sensing the quiet strength preserved beneath his strained expression. Rowan observed silently from the back of the room. He watched as strangers recognized truths hidden for generations, their reactions validating every hour he spent buried in dusty archives searching for fragments of forgotten humanity. He overheard conversations expressing admiration for the younger men's resilience, acknowledging the courage required to maintain dignity under pressure. Their voices carried respect the records never offered. As Rowan approached Corrin's photograph once more, he felt an unexpected connection. Though separated by time, he understood the weight Corrin carried, an internal battle preserved accidentally, yet powerful enough to reshape historical understanding. He whispered a quiet promise, ensuring Corrin's story would continue reaching audiences beyond this hall. Other men's stories, once buried beneath hierarchy, would finally surface and be recognized for their enduring strength. Rowan stepped back, allowing the scene to settle into memory. The images no longer felt trapped by silence. They now spoke openly, reshaped by the narrative he pieced together from fragments scattered across history's neglected corners. As he exited the hall, Rowan understood the legacy left behind by these men would influence future generations. Their quiet defiance, once nearly erased, now stood illuminated, refusing to fade again into obscurity. He walked into the night carrying a profound sense of purpose. Some stories survive not because they were recorded clearly, but because someone eventually chooses to look closely enough to understand the truth hidden within every restrained gesture. Rowan vowed to continue uncovering similar narratives, ensuring no man's struggle remained lost beneath manufactured harmony. Every photograph, every record, every fragmented testimony deserved the chance to speak once more. The legacy was alive now, unburied, undeniable, and unfolding. And Rowan, with renewed determination, stepped forward to honor it fully, Knowing the past depended on those willing to listen to what silence always tried to conceal.